The blizzard hit Malad City, Idaho, with a fury that nobody had seen in 20 years, and Adelaide Evans stood at the window of the general store watching the snow swallow the world whole while her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces inside her chest. She had received the letter that morning, the one that ended everything she thought her future would hold, and now the weather seemed determined to mirror the storm raging through her soul. The words from Thomas Gardner, her fiancé back in St. Louis, were still burned into her memory. He had found someone else, someone more suitable, someone whose father could help advance his political career. 2 years of waiting, 2 years of faithful correspondence, 2 years of planning a life together, all dismissed in 3 short paragraphs of carefully chosen words that somehow managed to be both apologetic and coldly practical. Adelaide pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the few remaining townsfolk hurry toward shelter before the storm made travel impossible. She had come to Malad City 8 months ago to help her Aunt Margaret run the general store after her uncle passed away from pneumonia. The plan had always been temporary, just until Thomas could establish himself in his law practice and send for her. Now she stood in this frontier town in February of 1884, 22 years old, and completely unmoored from the future she had built in her imagination. "You should head back to your aunt's house before this gets any worse," a deep voice said behind her, startling her from her thoughts. Adelaide turned to find Ryder Jackson standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands, snow still melting on the shoulders of his heavy coat. She had not heard him enter, but then again, Ryder moved through the world with a quietness that seemed at odds with his substantial frame. He was one of the ranch hands from the Double Bar Ranch about 5 miles outside of town, though he came into the store regularly for supplies. He was probably 25 or 26, with dark hair that was always a bit too long and eyes the color of stormy skies that rarely met anyone else's directly. "I was just closing up," Adelaide said, her voice catching slightly. She cleared her throat, hoping he had not noticed. "Did you need something?" Ryder's gaze flickered to her face and then away, settling somewhere over her left shoulder. "Just wanted to make sure everyone got out safe before the storm settled in proper. Roads are already getting bad. I will be fine. My aunt's house is just 3 blocks away." 3 blocks might as well be 3 miles in weather like this. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with prolonging the conversation but equally unwilling to leave. "I could walk you there. Make sure you get home safe." Adelaide almost refused out of pure habit. She had been raised to be independent, to not need help from anyone, especially not near strangers. But something in Ryder's quiet offer, the complete lack of expectation in his tone, made her reconsider. The wind howled outside, rattling the storefront windows, and she realized she was actually afraid of making that walk alone. "That would be kind of you," she said softly. Ryder nodded once and waited while she gathered her things, locked the cash drawer, and pulled on her heavy wool coat and gloves. She wrapped a thick scarf around her head and neck, knowing it would do little against the bitter cold, but needing whatever protection she could get. When she was ready, Ryder opened the door and the wind immediately tried to rip it from his hands. He held it steady with apparent ease while she stepped out into the maelstrom. The cold was shocking, stealing the breath from her lungs. Snow drove at them horizontally, tiny sharp crystals that stung any exposed skin. Adelaide could barely see 5 feet ahead of her, the familiar buildings of Malad City transformed into vague shapes in the white chaos. She felt a moment of pure panic, realizing how easy it would be to lose her way, to wander in circles until the cold claimed her. Then Ryder's hand was at her elbow, steady and sure, guiding her forward. He kept himself between her and the worst of the wind, his larger body providing a buffer against the storm. They moved slowly, carefully, Ryder somehow knowing exactly where to step even though Adelaide could see nothing but swirling white. She found herself trusting him completely, letting him lead her through the blizzard while she focused on simply putting one foot in front of the other. What should have been a 5-minute walk took nearly 20 minutes. By the time they reached her aunt's small house at the edge of town, Adelaide was shaking with cold despite her heavy clothing. Her fingers were numb inside her gloves, her face felt frozen, and her legs trembled with the effort of pushing through the deepening snow. Ryder stayed with her until she had the door unlocked, and then he stepped back, preparing to leave. "Wait," Adelaide called out, having to raise her voice to be heard over the wind. "You cannot go back out in this. Come inside, warm up before you try to make it back to the ranch." Ryder hesitated, and for a moment Adelaide thought he would refuse. Then he nodded and followed her inside, closing the door firmly behind them and shutting out the howling storm. The house was blessedly warm, the fire in the main room still burning well. Adelaide's Aunt Margaret emerged from the kitchen, her face creased with worry that transformed to relief when she saw Adelaide. "Thank the Lord," Margaret said, hurrying forward to embrace her niece. "I was about to send someone after you, though Lord knows who would have been fool enough to venture out, when I saw how fast that storm was moving in." "Ryder walked me home from the store," Adelaide said, unwrapping the scarf from her head with stiff fingers. "He made sure I got here safely." Margaret turned to look at Ryder, who had removed his hat and was standing just inside the door, looking profoundly uncomfortable with the attention. Margaret was a shrewd woman in her late 50s, and Adelaide watched her aunt's eyes assess Ryder with the quick judgment of someone who had lived on the frontier for 30 years. "Ryder Jackson from the Double Bar Ranch," Margaret said, and it was not a question. "I have seen you in the store. You are one of Sam Carson's best hands, if I recall the gossip correctly." "Yes, madam," Ryder said quietly. "Well, you are certainly not going anywhere in this weather. The storm sounds like it is getting worse, and it would be pure foolishness to try to make it 5 miles to the ranch. You will stay here tonight. We have a small room off the kitchen that you can use." Ryder started to protest, but Margaret cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I will not have it on my conscience that you froze to death because I was worried about propriety. Adelaide will make us all something hot to drink while I get that room ready. There is a stove in there, so it should warm up quickly enough." Before Ryder could argue further, Margaret bustled off toward the back of the house, leaving Adelaide alone with him in the front room. An awkward silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of the storm raging outside. Adelaide removed her coat and gloves, hanging them near the fire to dry, and then turned to find Ryder watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," she said. "I do not think I could have made it home alone." "You would have managed," Ryder said, but there was something in his voice that suggested he was glad he had been there regardless. Adelaide moved toward the kitchen, gesturing for him to follow. "Come on. Let us see what we can make to warm us up. I think my aunt has the fixings for coffee, and I know there is stew left from dinner." In the kitchen, Adelaide busied herself with the familiar tasks of building up the fire in the stove and setting coffee to brew. Ryder hung his coat on a peg near the door and then stood uncertainly in the middle of the room, as if unsure what to do with himself. Adelaide found bowls and ladled out generous portions of her aunt's beef stew, which was still warm in the pot on the back of the stove. She set everything on the kitchen table and gestured for Ryder to sit. "I promise it is safe," she said with a small smile, trying to ease some of the tension. "My aunt is an excellent cook, and I did not have anything to do with making this particular stew." Ryder's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I am sure you cook just fine. You would be wrong, but I appreciate the charitable assumption." This time Ryder did smile, a brief flash that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. He sat down at the table and Adelaide joined him, grateful for something to do with her hands and grateful not to be alone with her thoughts. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the warmth of the food spreading through Adelaide's body and easing the deep chill that had settled into her bones. "Storm like this, it might last a few days," Ryder said eventually, his voice quiet. "Roads will be impassable. Nobody is going anywhere for a while." Adelaide nodded, a strange mix of emotions swirling through her. Part of her welcomed the isolation, the excuse to hide away from the world and nurse her broken heart. Another part of her felt trapped, as if the walls were already closing in. She realized Ryder was watching her with those observant gray eyes, and she wondered what he saw in her face. "Are you all right?" he asked, and the question was so unexpected, so genuinely concerned, that Adelaide felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I am fine," she said automatically, but her voice betrayed her, cracking on the last word. Ryder did not say anything, did not push, just continued to watch her with that steady regard that somehow made her feel both exposed and safe. Adelaide found herself setting down her spoon, pressing her palms flat against the table, trying to hold herself together through sheer force of will. "I received a letter this morning," she heard herself say, the words emerging without her permission. "From my fiancé, my former fiancé. He has decided to marry someone else." The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Ryder did not offer empty platitudes or false sympathy. He just sat there, present and listening, and somehow that was exactly what Adelaide needed. "I am sorry," he said finally, and the simple words carried a weight of genuine feeling. "I thought I had my whole life planned out," Adelaide continued, unable to stop now that she had started. "I thought I knew exactly where I was going and who I would be, and now all of that is just gone, erased with a few paragraphs on a piece of paper. I do not even know who I am supposed to be anymore." "Maybe you are supposed to be exactly who you are right now," Ryder said quietly. "Maybe you do not need to be anybody else." Adelaide looked up at him, surprised by the insight in those words. In the warm light of the kitchen, with the storm raging outside, she really looked at Ryder Jackson for perhaps the first time since meeting him months ago. He had a good face, she realized, strong and honest, with the kind of weathered quality that came from spending most of your life outdoors. His hands, resting on either side of his bowl, were work-roughened and scarred, the hands of a man who earned his living through physical labor. There was a quietness to him, a stillness that seemed to run deep, and Adelaide found it oddly comforting. "How long have you worked at the Double Bar Ranch?" she asked, wanting to shift the conversation away from her own troubles. "About 4 years now. I drifted around a bit before that, worked ranches in Wyoming and Montana. But I liked it here, liked the people, so I stayed." "Do you have family somewhere?" Ryder's expression shuddered slightly, and Adelaide immediately regretted the question. "Had an older brother. He died about 6 years back. No other family that I am in touch with." "I am sorry. I should not have pried." "You were not prying, just asking a normal question." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "My brother was a good man. Got killed trying to break up a fight in a saloon that had nothing to do with him. Wrong place, wrong time. That must have been terrible for you." Ryder nodded slowly. "It was. But you learn to carry grief, I suppose. It becomes part of who you are, but it does not have to be all of who you are." Adelaide thought about that, wondered if the same would be true for her own heartbreak. Right now it felt all-consuming, as if Thomas's betrayal had carved out something essential from inside her chest. But perhaps Ryder was right. Perhaps in time it would become just one piece of her story rather than the defining chapter. Margaret returned then, announcing that Ryder's room was ready and that she was heading to bed herself. She fixed Adelaide with a meaningful look that clearly communicated expectations about proper behavior, but her goodnight to Ryder was warm enough. After she left, Adelaide and Ryder cleared the table together, washing dishes in companionable silence. "I should let you get some rest," Ryder said when they were finished. "It has been a long day." Adelaide wanted to ask him to stay a while longer, wanted to keep talking to this quiet man who somehow made her feel less alone. But that would have been inappropriate, and she was already conscious of the fact that he was staying under the same roof. So she simply nodded and wished him good night, watching as he disappeared into the small room off the kitchen. Alone in her own bedroom upstairs, Adelaide lay awake listening to the wind batter the house. She thought about Thomas and the future she had lost. She thought about being stranded here in Malad City, about whether she would return to St. Louis or try to make a different life for herself out here. And she thought about Ryder Jackson, about the unexpected kindness of his presence, about the way he had guided her through the storm without hesitation or expectation of reward. The blizzard raged for 3 full days. The snow piled up until it reached the lower windowsills, transforming Malad City into a landscape of white drifts and ice crystals. Adelaide spent those days in the strange intimacy of forced proximity with her aunt and their unexpected guest. Margaret kept them all busy with household tasks, enlisting Ryder to help with the heavier work like bringing in firewood and keeping the paths clear to the barn where they housed their few chickens and a milk cow. Adelaide found herself watching Ryder more than she probably should have. She noticed the way he moved with economical efficiency, never wasting motion or energy. She noticed how he always seemed to anticipate what needed doing before being asked, whether it was carrying water or fixing a loose hinge on a cabinet. She noticed the rare smiles that occasionally crossed his face, usually in response to something Margaret said, and how those smiles made him look younger and less guarded. What surprised Adelaide most was how comfortable the silence between them became. On the second day, they found themselves alone in the main room while Margaret was upstairs resting. Adelaide had been trying to read a book, but her mind kept wandering. Ryder was sitting near the fire, methodically repairing a broken bridle that Margaret had found in the barn, his hands working the leather with practiced skill. "Can I ask you something?" Adelaide said eventually, setting her book aside. Ryder glanced up. "Sure." "Why did you come into town that day? The day the storm hit. You said you wanted to make sure everyone got out safely, but that seems like more than a ranch hand's usual responsibilities." Ryder's hand stilled on the leather. For a moment, Adelaide thought he would not answer, but then he spoke, his voice even quieter than usual. "I came into town to see you." Adelaide's breath caught. "To see me? I wanted to make sure you were not planning to try to walk home in the storm. I knew your aunt was not feeling well earlier in the week, thought maybe she had not come to the store, thought maybe you would be alone." He still was not looking at her, his attention fixed on the bridle in his hands. "I know it was not my business, but I wanted to make sure you were safe." "How did you know my aunt had been unwell?" "I pay attention," Ryder said simply. Adelaide did not know what to say to that. There was something in this revelation that felt significant, though she could not quite articulate why. Ryder had noticed her aunt's absence from the store, had been concerned enough about Adelaide being alone to venture into town ahead of a dangerous storm. That spoke to a level of awareness and care that went beyond casual acquaintance. "I am glad you came," Adelaide said softly. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there." Ryder finally looked up at her, his gray eyes intense. "You would have been fine. You are stronger than you think you are. You do not know me well enough to know that. I know you came out to Idaho to help your aunt when your uncle died, even though it meant leaving behind your comfortable life in St. Louis. I know you work hard in that store every day, never complaining even when customers are difficult. I know you treat everyone with kindness, whether they are the mayor's wife or the drunk who sometimes wanders in begging for credit." He paused. "Maybe I do not know everything about you, but I know enough to know you are strong." Adelaide felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and something else she could not quite name. "You really do pay attention." "To some things more than others," Ryder admitted, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made Adelaide's heart skip. Before she could respond, Margaret's footsteps sounded on the stairs, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between them, some acknowledgement of connection that had not been spoken aloud before. Adelaide found herself even more aware of Ryder's presence in the house, of the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, of how empty the space felt when he was outside doing chores. On the third evening, the wind finally began to die down. The snow had stopped falling, and through the windows they could see stars emerging in the clearing sky. Ryder stood at the window in the main room, looking out at the transformed landscape, and Adelaide could see the tension in his shoulders. "You are worried about getting back to the ranch," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Sam will be wondering what happened to me. The other hands will have managed the stock, but they will be short-handed with me gone. Surely your boss will understand. No one could have traveled in that storm." "Sam will understand. I just do not like leaving work undone," he glanced at her. "But I am glad I was here, glad I could help." "You did more than help. You probably saved my life. I doubt that, but I am glad you are safe regardless." He turned to face her fully, and in the lamplight his expression was serious. "Adelaide, I need to tell you something before I leave." Adelaide's heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" Ryder seemed to struggle with the words, his usual quiet composure cracking slightly. "I have been coming into that store 2 or 3 times a week for months now, buying supplies we do not really need or finding excuses to check on orders. I have been doing that because it is the only way I could think of to see you, to be near you, without making a fool of myself." Adelaide stared at him, completely blindsided by this confession. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have been half in love with you since the first day I saw you behind that counter, helping old Mrs. Patterson find the right thread color for her sewing. You were patient with her even though she took forever to decide, and you laughed at something she said, and I thought you had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen." He took a breath, plunging forward now that he had started. "I know you were engaged. I know you had plans for a different life. I never said anything because I did not have any right to. But now things have changed, and I cannot leave tomorrow without you knowing how I feel, even if nothing comes of it, even if you do not feel the same way. You deserve to know that someone sees you, that someone thinks you are remarkable exactly as you are." Adelaide could not breathe. All this time, all these months of polite exchanges and brief conversations, Ryder had been harboring these feelings. She thought back over their interactions, seeing them now through this new lens. The way he always seemed to arrive at the store just before closing time, offering to help her carry heavy crates or reach high shelves. The way he listened intently to every word she said, as if her opinions on the weather or the latest shipment of dry goods were the most important things in the world. The way he had never once made her uncomfortable or pushed for more attention than she was willing to give. "You have loved me since we met," she whispered. "Since the moment I saw you, Ryder confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "I know that probably sounds foolish." "It does not sound foolish." Adelaide stepped closer to him, her mind racing. "It sounds like the most honest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." "I do not expect anything from you," Ryder continued. "I know you are dealing with heartbreak right now. I just wanted you to know that you are seen, that you are valued, that the man who let you go is the biggest fool who ever lived." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were different from the tears she had cried over Thomas's letter. These were tears of something that felt almost like relief, like recognition. She realized that over the past 3 days, she had not thought about Thomas more than a handful of times. Instead, she had thought about Ryder, about his quiet strength and his unexpected insights, about the way he made her feel both safe and seen. "What if I said I wanted to know you better?" Adelaide asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What if I said that spending these days with you has made me realize that maybe what I thought I wanted was not what I needed at all?" Ryder's eyes widened, hope flickering across his face before he carefully tamped it down. "I would say that I would be honored to court you properly, if you would allow it. I would say that I would do everything in my power to deserve your trust and your time." "You already have my trust," Adelaide said, surprised by how true it was. "You had it from the moment you walked me through that storm." "Adelaide," Ryder breathed her name like a prayer, and then slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, and Adelaide felt a spark of connection that was entirely different from anything she had felt with Thomas. This was not the calculated romance of shared social circles and appropriate matches. This was something raw and real and terrifying in its intensity. They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, looking at each other in the lamplight while the wind whispered its last protests outside. Then Adelaide stepped forward and rested her head against Ryder's chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her cheek. His arms came around her tentatively at first, then more firmly, holding her close. Adelaide closed her eyes and let herself be held, let herself acknowledge that this feeling of rightness was not something to be dismissed or denied. "I am not ready for grand declarations," she said softly, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I am still sorting through everything that has happened, but I want to try. I want to see where this leads." "That is more than enough," Ryder said, his voice vibrating through his chest. "That is everything." The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The snow had stopped entirely, and the world outside looked like something from a fairy tale, all pristine white and glittering ice. Ryder prepared to make his way back to the Double Bar Ranch, but before he left, he and Adelaide stood together on the front porch, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "I will come back into town as soon as the roads are passable," Ryder promised. "Maybe I could take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant. If that would be all right." "I would like that," Adelaide said, smiling up at him. "But be careful getting back to the ranch. That snow is deep." "I will be fine. I know these roads better than I know anything." He hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Adelaide watched him trudge off through the snow, his tall figure dark against the white landscape. She stood there until he was out of sight, feeling a strange mixture of contentment and nervous anticipation. Behind her, she heard the door open and Margaret stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cold. "That is a good man," Margaret said, her voice thoughtful. "Yes," Adelaide agreed. "I think he is. Very different from your Thomas." "Thomas was never really mine," Adelaide said, the realization settling into her bones with quiet certainty. "I think I loved the idea of him, the future he represented." but I do not think I ever really knew him, not the way I am beginning to know Ryder." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Love built on real knowledge, on seeing someone as they truly are, that is the kind that lasts. Your uncle and I had that. It was not always easy, but it was always real." Adelaide thought about that as the days passed and life in Malad City slowly returned to normal. The roads were cleared, the store reopened, and Adelaide fell back into her familiar routines. But everything felt different now, colored by anticipation and a growing excitement that she tried to keep in check, but could not quite suppress. Ryder came to town 3 days after the storm ended. Adelaide saw him through the store window, riding his horse down the main street, and her heart leapt in her chest. He tied his horse outside and entered the store, his eyes finding hers immediately. There were other customers present, so they could not speak freely, but the look that passed between them said everything that needed to be said. When the store finally emptied late in the afternoon, Ryder approached the counter. "Are you free this evening? For that dinner I mentioned." "I am free," Adelaide confirmed, unable to keep the smile from her face. That evening, Adelaide put on her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. Margaret helped her arrange her auburn hair in a more elaborate style than her usual simple bun. And when Adelaide came downstairs, her aunt beamed at her with undisguised approval. Ryder arrived exactly on time, wearing clean clothes and with his hair neatly combed. He offered Adelaide his arm and escorted her the few blocks to the Mountain View Hotel, which housed the best restaurant in Malad City. It was not fancy by St. Louis standards, but the food was good and the atmosphere warm and welcoming. The owner, a stout woman named Mrs. Chen, whose family had come from China to work on the railroads, seated them at a corner table near the fireplace, over plates of roast chicken and potatoes. Adelaide and Ryder talked in a way they had not been able to during the storm, with Margaret always nearby. Ryder told her about his childhood in Kansas, about growing up on a small farm with his brother, about how they had both headed west after their parents died of influenza. Adelaide talked about her upbringing in St. Louis, about her father's dry goods business and her mother's social ambitions, about how she had always felt slightly out of step with the world they inhabited. "I never quite fit the mold they wanted for me," Adelaide admitted. "I liked books too much, had opinions I was supposed to keep to myself. Thomas seemed like the perfect compromise, someone educated enough to appreciate my interests but traditional enough to satisfy my parents. I thought I could make that work." "You should never have to make yourself smaller to fit someone else's expectations," Ryder said with quiet intensity. "The right person will love you for exactly who you are, all of it, no compromises." "Is that what you are offering?" Adelaide asked, both nervous and hopeful. "That is exactly what I am offering," Ryder confirmed. "I want to know everything about you, Adelaide. Your favorite books and your worst fears and what you dream about when you let yourself imagine the future. I want to learn how you take your coffee and what makes you laugh and what matters most to you in this world. And I want you to know all of those things about me too." They talked until the restaurant was ready to close, until Mrs. Chen was giving them pointed looks and banking the fires. When Ryder walked Adelaide home through the cold night, she felt more alive than she had in months, maybe years. At her aunt's door, Ryder took her hand and held it gently. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," Adelaide said without hesitation, "and the day after that if you like." "I would like that very much." This time when he kissed her forehead in farewell, Adelaide rose up on her toes and kissed his cheek in return, a brief press of her lips against his cold skin that made him draw in a sharp breath. Then she slipped inside before she could lose her nerve, her heart pounding and her cheeks flushed. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Adelaide had experienced with Thomas. Where her engagement had been conducted largely through letters and carefully supervised meetings in parlors, her relationship with Ryder was built on long walks through the snowy streets of Adelaide City, on conversations that stretched for hours, on quiet moments of comfortable silence that felt as intimate as words. Ryder came into town every day that weather and work permitted, and gradually, Adelaide came to know him in a way that felt both thrilling and deeply comfortable. She learned that he loved horses with a passion that bordered on reverence, that he could talk for an hour about the merits of different breeds and training techniques. She learned that he had taught himself to read as a child using an old Bible and whatever newspapers he could get his hands on, and that he still read voraciously whenever he could find books. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh in delight. She learned that he carried guilt over his brother's death, feeling that he should have been there to prevent it somehow, even though logically he knew that was impossible. In turn, Adelaide shared parts of herself that she had never shown Thomas. She told Ryder about her dreams of traveling, of seeing the places she had only read about in books. She confessed her complicated feelings about her parents, the love mixed with frustration at their expectations. She shared her fear that she was not good enough at anything in particular, that she lacked some essential purpose or direction that everyone else seemed to possess naturally. "You do not need to be good at some specific thing to have value," Ryder told her one afternoon as they walked along the edge of town where the prairie stretched endlessly toward the horizon. "You are good with people. You make them feel heard and valued. That is a rarer gift than you realize." "That does not feel like enough," Adelaide admitted. "It does not feel like a real contribution." "Why not? What would this town be like if everyone was so focused on their own importance that they forgot to see each other? You make the world a kinder place just by being in it." "That matters more than you know." It was conversations like these that made Adelaide realize she was falling in love with Ryder Jackson, truly and deeply in love in a way that had nothing to do with social expectations or practical considerations. She loved his quiet wisdom and his gentle strength. She loved the way he listened to her, really listened, as if every word she spoke mattered. She loved his hands, strong and scarred from work, and the way they held hers with such careful tenderness. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and amazing that he could hardly believe he was allowed to touch. Spring came late to Idaho that year, but when it finally arrived in April, it transformed the landscape almost overnight. The snow melted in rushing streams, the prairie burst into bloom with wildflowers, and the air turned soft and sweet. Ryder brought Adelaide out to the Double Bar Ranch for the first time on a Sunday afternoon, wanting to show her the place where he spent most of his time. The ranch was a sprawling operation with a large main house, several barns and outbuildings, and seemingly endless stretches of fenced pasture where cattle and horses grazed. Sam Carson, the owner, was a gruff man in his 60s who greeted Adelaide with careful courtesy, and then proceeded to praise Ryder's work ethic and reliability for a solid 10 minutes, much to Ryder's obvious embarrassment. "Best hand I have ever had," Sam declared. "Honest, hardworking, knows cattle and horses better than men twice his age. I have been trying to convince him to take on more responsibility, maybe become my foreman when old Pete retires, but he is stubborn about it." After extracting themselves from Sam's enthusiastic endorsement, Ryder took Adelaide on a tour of the ranch. He showed her the horses he had gentled and trained, introducing her to each one with obvious affection. He showed her the wide valley where the cattle grazed in summer, the creek that ran clear and cold from the mountains, the place where eagles nested in the tall pines. Adelaide could see how much he loved this land, how connected he was to this life, and she found herself imagining what it would be like to be part of this world with him. They ended up sitting by the creek, listening to the water rush over smooth stones, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. Ryder had been quiet for a while, and Adelaide could tell he was working up to saying something important. "Sam offered me a piece of land," Ryder said finally. "About 100 acres on the eastern edge of his property. Said if I wanted to build a house there, start my own herd, he would sell it to me at a fair price and give me time to pay it off." "That is wonderful," Adelaide said, genuinely excited for him. "It is what you have always wanted, is it not? Your own place." "It is," Ryder agreed. "But I have been afraid to accept the offer." "Why?" Ryder turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious and full of emotion. "Because I do not want to build a life there alone. Because what I want more than land or cattle or anything else is to build that life with you." Adelaide's breath caught. They had been courting for nearly 3 months now, and while the depth of feeling between them had been obvious, this was the first time either of them had spoken explicitly about a future together. "I know it is not what you thought your life would be," Ryder continued, words tumbling out faster than his usual careful pace. "I know you thought you would be a lawyer's wife in St. Louis, living in a nice house with servants and society and all the things you grew up with. I cannot offer you any of that. What I can offer is a ranch wife's life, hard work and uncertain income and isolation, especially at first. But I can also offer you my whole heart, Adelaide. I can offer you a partnership where your voice matters and your dreams matter. I can offer you a life where you will be seen and valued and loved every single day for exactly who you are." Adelaide felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "You really think I care about society and servants? Do you really think I would choose an easy life in St. Louis over a real life here with you?" "I hope not," Ryder said. "But I needed you to understand what you would be choosing. I needed you to have all the information before I asked you to marry me." "Then ask me," Adelaide said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Ask me properly." Ryder shifted so he was kneeling in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "Adelaide Evans, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me on this land, raise a family with me, grow old with me? Will you let me love you for the rest of our days?" "Yes," Adelaide said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes to all of it. Yes to everything." Ryder pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time, a kiss that held all the longing and tenderness and joy that had been building between them for months. Adelaide kissed him back with equal fervor, feeling like she was finally home. They were married 6 weeks later in late May, when the prairie was at its most beautiful, and the weather was warm and clear. The ceremony took place in the small church in Malad City, with Margaret beaming in the front pew and Sam Carson giving Adelaide away in the absence of her father, who had sent a cold letter declining to attend once he learned she was marrying a ranch hand rather than returning to St. Louis. Adelaide found she did not care. The people who mattered were there: her aunt, the friends she had made in town, the ranch hands from the double bar who treated Ryder like a brother. Adelaide wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Ryder had picked that morning. Ryder wore his best suit, and when Adelaide walked down the aisle toward him, the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed Adelaide with a tenderness that made several ladies in the congregation reach for their handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the hotel, with Mrs. Chen outdoing herself on the food and the whole town seemingly in attendance. Adelaide danced with her new husband, with Sam, with the other ranch hands, laughing and celebrating surrounded by people who had become her community. Late in the evening, as the party was winding down, Ryder pulled her outside into the soft spring night. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Jackson?" he asked, his voice warm with happiness. "More than ready," Adelaide confirmed. They had spent the past month building a small house on Ryder's new land, a simple structure of wood and stone with 2 rooms and a loft that could be finished later. It was not much yet, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with their hopes for the future. Ryder had carved their initials into the mantel above the fireplace, and Adelaide had sewn curtains for the windows, and together they had made it a home. That night, lying in her husband's arms in their bed in their house on their land, Adelaide marveled at how completely her life had transformed. A year ago, she had been someone else entirely, engaged to a man who saw her as an accessory to his ambitions, planning a life that would have slowly suffocated her soul. Now she was Adelaide Jackson, wife to a cowboy who loved her with his whole heart, building a life that was hard and uncertain but utterly, completely real. "What are you thinking?" Ryder murmured, his lips against her temple. "I am thinking that I am glad for that blizzard," Adelaide said softly. "I am glad my heart was broken, because if none of that had happened, I never would have found this. I never would have found you. I would have waited as long as it took," Ryder said. "I would have loved you from a distance for years if that was all I could have. But I am glad I get to love you like this instead." "Tell me again," Adelaide whispered. "Tell me you love me." "I love you," Ryder said, his voice fierce and tender all at once. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you. I will love you until the day I die and beyond if such things are possible. You are everything to me, Adelaide. Everything." Adelaide kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into that kiss, and Ryder responded with equal passion. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they had given to learning each other's hearts. Afterward, Adelaide lay with her head on Ryder's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling more at peace than she ever had in her life. The years that followed were filled with hard work and simple joys. Ryder and Adelaide built up their small ranch through determination and careful management, expanding their herd gradually and improving their land. Adelaide discovered she had a gift for raising chickens and keeping bees, and the money from selling eggs and honey in town helped supplement their income. She also discovered she had more strength and resilience than she had ever imagined, withstanding harsh winters and dry summers, helping with the cattle when Ryder needed an extra hand, learning to shoot and ride and do 100 other things she never would have learned in St. Louis. But the hard work was balanced by moments of profound happiness. Evening meals at their table, talking over the events of the day. Nights lying together, planning their dreams and sharing their hopes. Trips into town for supplies that became opportunities to visit with friends and feel connected to their community. Dances at the town hall where Ryder would hold Adelaide close and whisper how beautiful she looked. Quiet Sunday mornings when they would sleep late and then make breakfast together, moving around their small kitchen in comfortable synchronicity. In the fall of 1885, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She told Ryder one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. He had been so overcome with joy that he could not speak for a long moment, just held her and shook with emotion. "We are going to be parents," he finally managed to say. "You are going to make me a father. Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Ryder said. "Terrified, amazed, grateful, all of those things at once, but mostly just so deeply, profoundly happy. Their son was born in May of 1886, during a spring rainstorm that drummed on the roof while Adelaide labored. Margaret had come to stay and help with the birth, and Ryder paced outside until Margaret finally took pity on him and let him come in to be with his wife. Adelaide would never forget the look on Ryder's face when he first held their baby boy, the absolute wonder and fierce protectiveness that transformed his features. They named him Matthew, after Ryder's brother, and he had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Ryder proved to be a devoted father, endlessly patient with their son, always willing to hold him or walk with him or play with him no matter how tired he was from working the ranch. Adelaide would sometimes pause in her work to watch Ryder with Matthew, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. When Matthew was 2, Adelaide became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to twin daughters in the winter of 1889. They named them Rose and Sarah, and they had red hair like their mother and their father's gray eyes. The house felt wonderfully chaotic with 3 small children, and Ryder expanded it, adding more rooms and finishing the loft, making space for their growing family. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Ryder's reputation as an honest dealer and a skilled cattleman spread, and they were able to expand their holdings. In 1890, when Sam Carson decided to sell the Double Bar Ranch and retire to California to live with his daughter, Ryder was able to purchase a significant portion of the land, more than doubling their acreage. It was a huge undertaking, but they managed it together, Adelaide keeping the books and managing the business side while Ryder oversaw the cattle and horses. By 1895, the Jackson Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the region. They had built a larger, more comfortable house, though Adelaide had insisted on keeping the original structure as a guest house, unwilling to let go of the place where they had started their life together. They employed several ranch hands, and Adelaide made sure to provide them with good wages and comfortable accommodations, remembering how Ryder had once been in their position. Their children grew strong and healthy, thriving in the freedom of ranch life. Matthew showed his father's gift with horses, able to gentle even the most difficult animals with patience and intuition. Rose was bold and fearless, always climbing trees and racing her horse and challenging her brother to competitions. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love of books that reminded Adelaide of herself at that age, through all of it, through every challenge and triumph. Adelaide and Ryder's love remained the foundation of everything they built. They still made time for each other, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other across a crowded room and shared a smile that communicated volumes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder gave Adelaide a necklace he had commissioned from a jeweler in Boise, a delicate silver chain with a pendant in the shape of a snowflake. "For the storm that brought us together," he said, as he fastened it around her neck. "For the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you," Adelaide said, turning to face him. "More now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "How did I get so lucky?" Ryder wondered, pulling her into his arms. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You saw me," Adelaide said simply. "You loved me when I was broken and lost. You gave me a reason to believe in love again, in myself again. You gave me everything that matters." In the summer of 1896, Adelaide's parents came to visit for the first time since her marriage. They had gradually softened over the years, especially after Adelaide sent them photographs of their grandchildren, and her mother had finally convinced her father to make the long journey west to see their daughter's life. Adelaide had been nervous about the visit, unsure how her parents would react to the ranch, to the hard work and modest circumstances that were so different from what they had wanted for her. But when her mother stepped down from the wagon that brought them from the train station, she took one look at Adelaide's face and burst into tears. "You are happy," she said, embracing her daughter tightly. "I can see it in your eyes. You are truly happy." "I am, Mama," Adelaide confirmed. "Happier than I ever could have been in the life you wanted for me." Her father was slower to come around, but Adelaide watched him soften over the course of the 2-week visit. She saw him listen as Ryder explained the operation of the ranch, respect growing in his eyes as he realized the business acumen required to manage such an enterprise. She saw him play with his grandchildren, laughing as Matthew showed him how to rope a fence post and Rose challenged him to a horse race. By the time they left, her father pulled Ryder aside and Adelaide heard him say, "You take good care of my daughter. She chose better than I knew." As the new century approached, Adelaide sometimes reflected on the path her life had taken, on all the moments that had led her to this place. She thought about Thomas Gardner sometimes, not with bitterness, but with a kind of grateful bewilderment that she had ever thought that future would make her happy. She had heard through the gossip mill that he was indeed a successful politician now, married to the daughter of a railroad magnate, living exactly the life he had planned. She wished him well, but felt no regret whatsoever. Her life was here, on this land that she and Ryder had built into something beautiful. Her life was in the children who filled their house with laughter and chaos. Her life was in the community they were part of, the town that had become her home. Her life was in waking up every morning next to the man who had loved her since the moment they met, who had been patient enough to wait until she could love him back. On a cold evening in December of 1899, Adelaide and Ryder sat on the porch of their home, wrapped in quilts against the chill, watching their children play in the first snow of the season. Matthew was 15 now, tall and serious and so much like his father it made Adelaide's heart ache with love. The twins were 10, still finishing each other's sentences and getting into trouble together. Inside the house, their youngest daughter Emily, born in 1893, was probably getting into mischief while they were not watching, but Adelaide could not bring herself to move from the warmth of Ryder's side. "Do you ever regret it?" Ryder asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Giving up the life you could have had?" Adelaide turned to look at her husband, at the face she loved more than any other, at the gray eyes that still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. His hair was starting to show threads of silver at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Adelaide, he was more handsome now than he had been at 25. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "That was never my life, Ryder. It was a life I thought I was supposed to want, but it was not mine. This is my life. You are my life. Our children, our ranch, our love, this is everything I was meant for. I have never doubted that, not once since the day I said yes to you." "I love you," Ryder said, the words still carrying the same weight and wonder they had carried 15 years ago. "Every day I love you more. Every day I am grateful that blizzard hit when it did, that I was brave enough to walk you home, that you were generous enough to give me a chance. You had my heart before I even knew I was giving it away," Adelaide confessed. "All those months you came into the store, all those quiet conversations, you were already weaving yourself into my soul. I just could not see it until my heart broke and made room for something real." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow fall gently, watching their children's breath make clouds in the cold air. Adelaide thought about the girl she had been when she first arrived in Malad City, heartbroken and lost and unsure of who she was supposed to be. She thought about the quiet cowboy who had walked her through a blizzard and somehow saved her in every way that mattered. She thought about love, real love, the kind built on mutual respect and genuine knowing and daily choice. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Ryder asked. "For seeing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me, for being exactly who you are." Adelaide reached for his hand, their gloved fingers intertwining in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "For loving me since the moment we met, even when I was too blind to see it." "It was the easiest thing I ever did," Ryder said. "Loving you has never taken effort, Adelaide. It is as natural as the sun rising, as inevitable as the seasons changing. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Adelaide assured him. "You always have been." Inside the house, Emily started crying, probably having gotten into exactly the mischief Adelaide had suspected. Rose came running to the porch to report that her little sister had knocked over a lamp and was scared she had broken it. Matthew called for his father to come settle a disagreement about whose turn it was to feed the horses. The moment of quiet reflection was over, replaced by the beautiful chaos of their real life. But as Adelaide stood and prepared to go deal with whatever disaster Emily had created, Ryder caught her hand and pulled her back for one more kiss. It was brief but full of promise, a reminder that no matter how busy their lives became, no matter what challenges they faced, they would always have this connection, this love that had started in a blizzard and had only grown stronger with time. "I love you," Adelaide whispered against his lips. "I love you more," Ryder replied. "Impossible," Adelaide said, smiling, "but we can argue about it later. Right now we have a lamp to check on and horses to feed and a family to take care of." "Together," Ryder said, and it was not a question. "Always together," Adelaide confirmed. They walked back into the house hand in hand, into the warmth and noise and wonderful mess of the life they had built. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the prairie in white, transforming the landscape just as another snowstorm had transformed their lives 15 years ago. But Adelaide was no longer the heartbroken girl who had stood at a window watching the world disappear into a blizzard. She was a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, her home. She was a wife, a mother, a rancher, a friend, a valued member of her community. But most of all, she was loved. Loved completely and truly by a quiet cowboy who had seen her when she felt invisible, who had valued her when she felt worthless, who had given her the space to heal and the courage to love again. That love had been the foundation of everything good in her life, and Adelaide knew with absolute certainty that it would sustain them through whatever years remained ahead. As the new century dawned and life continued its inevitable march forward, Adelaide and Ryder Jackson faced it together, just as they had faced everything else. Their children grew and eventually left to build lives of their own, though none of them strayed far from the ranch that was the bedrock of the family. Matthew took over the operation eventually, running it with the same integrity and skill his father had shown. Rose married a neighboring rancher and became a force of nature in the community, fighting for women's suffrage and better schools. Sarah became a teacher, inspiring young minds with her love of learning. Emily, the surprise baby who had kept them young in their 40s, became a veterinarian, one of the first women in Idaho to pursue that profession. Through it all, Adelaide and Ryder remained each other's constant. They grew old together on the land they loved, watching the world change around them while their love remained unchanged at its core. When Ryder finally passed in 1925 at the age of 66, Adelaide held his hand and told him one more time how much she loved him, how grateful she was for every day they had been given. "Best decision I ever made," Ryder whispered, his voice weak but his eyes still clear. "Loving you. Best life I could have imagined." "Mine too," Adelaide said through her tears. "The best life, the only life I wanted." Adelaide lived another 8 years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the legacy of love and integrity that she and Ryder had built. When she finally passed peacefully in her sleep in 1933 at the age of 71, her family buried her next to Ryder on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could rest together forever in the land they had loved. On her gravestone, at the request of her children, were carved simple words that told the whole story. Adelaide Jackson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She was loved from the moment they met, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the heartbreak that had brought her to Idaho, not the easy life she had given up, not the hardships they had endured. What mattered was the love, deep and true and lasting, that had transformed two broken souls into something whole, something beautiful, something eternal. The love of a quiet cowboy who had seen her, really seen her, and had loved what he saw with his whole heart. The love that had been there from the very beginning, patient and constant, waiting for her to be ready to receive it. That love had been the making of Adelaide Jackson. It had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined for herself. It had given her purpose and passion and a deep, abiding joy that never faded even in the hardest times. And long after she was gone, that love lived on in the family she had built, in the land she had helped nurture, in the community she had been part of, in the countless small acts of kindness and courage that rippled out from the choice she had made that day to let a quiet cowboy walk her through a blizzard. It lived on in the story that was told and retold by her descendants, the story of how their grandmother had been snowbound and heartbroken, lost and unsure of who she was meant to be, until she learned that the quiet cowboy had loved her since the moment they met. That love had saved her, had shown her who she truly was, had given her everything that mattered. And in learning to love him back, in choosing to build a life with him, Adelaide had found not just romance but redemption, not just happiness but home, not just love but the truest version of herself. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. It was a story that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when everything falls apart, when the future we planned disappears and forces us to find a different path. Sometimes being lost is exactly what we need to be found. Sometimes heartbreak is the necessary breaking that allows our hearts to open wide enough to hold real love. And sometimes the person who has been quietly loving us all along is exactly the person we were meant to find. For Adelaide and Ryder Jackson, that blizzard in February of 1884 had been the beginning of everything that mattered. It had been the storm that cleared away all the false paths and left only the true one visible. It had been the cold that drove them together, so they could discover the warmth they could create between them. It had been the moment when their real lives began, the moment when the quiet cowboy's patient love and the heartbroken young woman's courage to try again had collided and created something absolutely beautiful. And that beauty had lasted a lifetime, had created a legacy that would echo through generations, had proved that love, real love, the kind built on seeing and knowing and choosing each other every single day, was the most powerful force in the world. More powerful than heartbreak, more powerful than disappointment, more powerful than fear or doubt or the crushing weight of broken dreams. In the end, Adelaide's story was a simple one. A girl arrived in a frontier town, broken-hearted and lost. A boy saw her and loved her and waited patiently for her to heal. A blizzard brought them together in circumstances that allowed them to truly know each other. And from that knowing came a love that shaped the rest of their lives, that created something beautiful and lasting and true. It was a love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the American West, a testament to the transformative power of genuine connection and the extraordinary lives that can be built when two people choose each other completely. It was the story of Ryder and Adelaide Jackson, the quiet cowboy and the heartbroken girl, who found in each other everything they had been searching for and so much more than they ever dreamed possible.